Hello there, Force of Will players. My name is Charlie DeMel, and today what I'm going to be doing for this video is I wanted to go ahead and take the L0 judge test that recently got posted to the Force of Will global page, as well as been posted around to a few other areas like the Discord, etc., etc. I actually helped to write this with James Mount. I wrote a few of the questions that are on the test itself, and I helped to edit the test, so I do know what the answers already are going to be. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in depth with each question, go into the CR, show you where you would find the answers that you would be looking for, etc., etc. I don't remember every question in order, nor do I have like a set script or anything for this, so there might be some time where I'm kind of like fumbling looking around through the CR to search what I'm looking for. But yeah, so that's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna get straight on into it, and we're gonna start off with the first question. So the first question, we got true or false. A player is able to put Mirage Fantasy Queen 4C, so an alternative card, put the Resonator half into the field via the activated ability of Valentina, the Princess of Love. So Valentina's effect is you may put a Water Resonator with total cost 2 or less from your hand into the field. So basically this is asking about alternative cards. And if you didn't do this, you can always have the CR pulled up while you're taking one of these exams. I mean, there's nothing stopping you. So why not use it? You also have unlimited time. So we're doing alternative cards. So you just control F, alternative cards. They're only one card. You choose what's going on to the chase. I'm going to close Discord real quick so I don't get pinged constantly and have weird noises in the background. So this is what we're looking for. So we're looking for 1307.5. So in every zone except the chase and the field, the characteristics of an alternative card are those of its two halves combined. This includes its name, etc., etc. But then 1307.5b is the total cost of an alternative card as the combined total cost of its two halves. And that will be in every zone except the chase and the field. So with Mirage being in your hand, at the time of you activating Valentina's effect, its total cost would be 4. That is how alternative cards would work. If Mirage was already in play, it would be a total cost of 2, because in the field it only references the one half of the alternative card. Same thing with the chase. So the answer to this question would be false. You are not allowed to put Mirage into play off of Valentina's effect. Okay. Player A controls Gil Lapis on his J-Ruler side with Imperishables. This guy right here. They play the God's Art ability of Gil Lapis, and the opponent responds by playing Black Moonray and destroys the Gil Lapis. Which of the following is true? So this question is basically asking how the God's Art resolves. So a pretty common misconception is that there was a rulings change with Gil Lapis in how continuous abilities apply to rulers and J-rulers. The common misconception is that so if you remember an old card, it was called Valentina 2.0. It was like Valentina, Lord of the Seven Seas or something like that, or Overlord of the Seven something. It was the one that got all the God's Art abilities from all the other 7 kings. It has the same text of this card gains when you judgment the card. And so the old ruling for her was when she died. The original ruling was when she died, she didn't keep her God's Arts, and then it was reworked later that when she did die, because rulers and J-rulers are considered the same card, that when she went back to the ruler zone, she still retained all their names, all their abilities, etc., etc. When Gil Lapis came out, they added another thing of text into the CR. I believe it's in section 200. I think it's under basic. Let's see. I think it's 20. Let me zoom out of here real quick. Type basic 300 302. Not 203. So in basic, they added 302.3. So what 302.3 is if a card moves from one zone to another, if it moves from the field to a ruler area or from a ruler area to the field, it's treated as the same card. So that's the whole thing of it being treated as the same card. But then 302.3a is unless otherwise specified, any effect applied to a card in an older zone is not applied to the card in the newer zone. So what that did was it caused effects like Gil Lapis's God's Art, like Valentina's effect, etc., to not apply within a if they had resolved the effect and died, it would not apply when they were a ruler. So even though Gil Lapis has this card gains, resonators your opponent's control gain -4/-4, if that effect resolved and then Gil Lapis were to die, he would no longer have it on his ruler side. However, what this question is asking is it's saying that player A activates the God's Art, and in response to the God's Art being activated, player B kills the Gil Lapis. So because it is the same card, it is still the same card, and the effect is not fully resolved, the Gil Lapis will move back to the ruler area, and then the effect will begin to apply, which means the Gil Lapis on his ruler side will also have this card gains resonators your opponent control have -4/-4, or -400/-400. That would apply to the Valentina as well, because she has the same text, I believe, of this card gains. So if you were to kill her in response to the judgment, she would go back to the front with all the God's Arts, as opposed to killing her after it resolves. So I think this was a pretty commonly missed question. From looking at some of the responses that I've seen, I have access to everyone's answers, so I'm pretty sure a fair amount of people got this one wrong. But so he would retain it on his ruler side, so whichever one that one would be. Gil Lapis gains on the ruler side, and then he'd lose the ability after judgmenting. Yeah, if he re-judgmented, he would lose it. That is something to also know, because, again, of 302.3a, the effect being applied in the older zone would not be applied in the newer zone. Okay, so that would be the answer to that one. This one, I wrote this question. It is player A's turn. Player A has a recovered giant that has been in the field since the start of the turn. Player A attempts to move to their end phase. Before player A has successfully moved to their end phase, player B plays a mimic that successfully resolves and enters the field, which of the following is true. So for battle, oh god. Initiate battle. Where's battle step? It's 800, I believe. Yeah. So 803.3 is the part you're looking for. So 803.3 is turn player must choose to attack if any effects force them to do so. Otherwise, the turn player chooses to attack or forfeit the attack. So what forfeiting the attack is which is the answer B right here. Forfeiting is if I move into combat and then either myself or my opponent play like an effect or anything like that. After that effect resolves, you are allowed to forfeit the combat and just back out of the combat. However, if an effect, like it says here in 803.3, forces you to attack, you have to attack. You're not allowed to forfeit. So because it says they must attack if any effects force them to do so, which the Mimic does. So you're not allowed to move to the end step because they... how priority works is you have to pass priority to your opponent, and both players have to agree in order to move on to the next phase. So how it would work is if you're in like your main phase or main step, I forget what Force calls them. I think it's phases. If you're in your main phase and you're like, I choose to play nothing and want to move to end step, your opponent can then respond. They get priority to play something. So in this case, they would play the Mimic. It would come into play, and then it goes back into main step. You don't move straight to the end phase. You go back into the main step, and a new priority sequence would start, at which point you have to go into combat. So you can play something else, like you can like kill the Mimic or do something like that, but if you're not allowed to move to the next step or phase because there's an attack forcing you to do combat, where 803.3 forces you to do so. So that would be this one. So you must initiate battle and attack the Mimic. The other thing that some people may think is if you forfeit the battle, so if you go into combat and then forfeit it without playing anything, or your opponent plays nothing, you're no longer allowed to enter combat for the rest of the turn. You're not allowed to do that if an effect instructs you to attack, like forces you to attack. You are allowed to do that if there's no such effect in play. So just because your opponent plays something, you can't be like, oh, I went into combat. I forfeit that combat. I don't play anything. You don't play anything. You're not allowed to do that. You have to actually tap and attack the thing that is forcing your stuff to attack. Okay. So that would be the answer to that one. I also wrote this question. Player A has an Electo Unstoppable Fear in the field. Player A then plays 4C with no cards remaining in their hand. What best explains what happens while 4C is resolving? So this was a question to do with Null. So Null was revisited in the most recent set. Otherwise, it hadn't really been used in a while. So Null is a continuous ability. Null means that as long as there are 0 cards in your hand, the card with Null gains text. There's other parts to this, but the primary one that you need is just, for this question, is just 1134.2. It's just this first part of Null. It means as long as there's 0 cards in your hand, this card gains text. So for Electo, the effect is whenever you draw a card, your opponent banishes blah, 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 blah. So it's when you have 0 cards in hand, if you were to draw a card, it triggers. So how continuous effects work like that is they're kind of applying like a blanket field effect like all the time, even in the middle of resolution. So what would happen is with 4C, you would resolve 4C, you would draw a card, and then the Null effect would trigger, because you have to have 0 cards in hand for the Null effect to trigger. And then as soon as that one card enters your hand, Null is instantly turned off. It's just gone at that point. So you would then draw the second card. However, in between you drawing that first card and drawing that second card, you have one triggered object of Electo. There's more to it to fully explain this. You would have to go into delayed automatic triggers to fully explain the concept of why the whenever effect triggers at that state. But I'm not going to fully delve into that. Delayed automatic triggers are a little bit weird. All you have to know is that a continuous ability pretty much just applies a field state, and then it gave an automatic effect to Electo, which triggered and caused a delayed automatic trigger. So it would draw your second card in the middle of resolving the 4C. Okay. So it would be D, I believe. Yep. Yeah, so that's what that question is. If you want to look at delayed automatic triggers, they're under automatic abilities in the 900 section, I believe. Oh God. Automatic abilities. So they're under here. And then triggered automatic objects. So it'd be like in this area, like down in this part. So that's where you would look for delayed automatic triggers. So it's kind of a mixture of both, but the primary thing is understanding that Null is a continuous ability held by cards, and that continuous abilities are a blanket field state. So they don't continue to apply. It's not that I draw 2 and I get 2 triggers because I had 0 cards in hand. It's that I draw 1 and I have the single trigger. Okay. This one. Player A plays a part of true power from their graveyard via Remnant. Okay. Player B plays and resolves the Resonator half of Welser. Welser's enter ability resolves targeting a part of true power. Which of the following is true? So Welser's enter ability returns a spell on the target spell to its owner's hand. So it returns a spell on the chase to its owner's hand. So this one is dealing with Remnant, which is a fun keyword, is also a continuous ability. Remnant means you may play this card from your grave. If you played this card from your grave by Remnant, if it would move from the chase to anywhere else, remove it from the game instead. So even though the Welser is bouncing the part of true power to my hand, Remnant, the continuous effect affecting game state, will remove the part of true power just by rules process. So it won't return to hand, so it would be removed from the game. It would be B. This question. I feel like I wrote all the bad questions. So player A plays and resolves a Prisia Seeker of Friends with X equals 2. Enter effect resolves, and while searching through their deck, player A plays the Flame of Outer World half of Satan's Phantasmal Body, Flame of Outer World. I'll get into what all these cards do in a second if you're unsure. Player A finishes resolving the effect of Prisia and puts a Never End into field. What best explains what happens? So I'm actually unsure if the CR has a players cannot chase 2 clause. Cannot chase. Oh, no, it does not. Heck yeah. We're going to turn that down. So it doesn't. So what this is doing, so the Satan's Phantasmal Body Flame of Outer World alternative card has the text that you may play this card from your deck while you're searching through your deck, and you can play either half of it. The Flame of Outer World part has players cannot chase to this card. There are like a total of like 13 to 15 cards in the game that say players cannot chase to the card or an ability or whatever. So they're very rare. However, in the process of resolving the Prisia, the player has put a Never End into play, which Never End has an enter effect to draw a card. So the question is how does the chase work in that sense? So like where is everything layered? What is each player allowed to do, et cetera, et cetera? That's what I was kind of getting with this question. It was pretty common because some people were playing Flames to out Violet in the most recent meta that we had. So this question actually came up a bit at events. So what this is how effects resolve in sub-effects. So I actually didn't know this until I reached out for a different question, actually, but it also relates to this in the sense that they resolve piece by piece. So, for example, like the Prisia effect, the first part of the sub-effect would be like search your deck for. And then the second part of the sub-effect would be put it into play. And then the third part of the sub-effect would be shuffle your deck. They're pretty much like split into like sections, basically. So while you are searching through your deck, you are allowed to play the Satan's Phantasmal Body. So you play the Satan's Phantasmal Body in the middle of resolving a card. So you now have a card is being resolved, so the effect is no longer on the chase. In a sense, and then you have the Flame of Outer World on the chase. You fully resolve the effect of Prisia, and you put Never End into play. So Never End has now entered play, and it doesn't prevent players cannot chase to this card does not prevent objects from triggering. It just prevents players from chasing. So the Never End will trigger, and then it will put the enter effect above the Flame of Outer World on the chase. However, players cannot chase to this card does not mean it can't be isn't like it can't be chased to directly. It means it can't be chased at all. Nothing is allowed to be put onto the chase by a player while that card exists on the chase, is what that text means. So like triggered automatic objects. So like back in the day, one of the things was Wind Secluded Refuge. Would be like when one of your things was targeted, you could sack Wind Secluded Refuge to negate the card that was targeting your thing, your entity. That could stop Flame of Outer World because it was a triggered automatic object. It wasn't player controlled. It was due to the game state. Same thing in the case of like Never End or other enter effects being played on top of Flames, or Flame of Outer World. They will still trigger because they're triggered automatic objects. They're not being placed there by the players themselves. It's being placed there effectively by the game. So in the case of this, neither player would be able to respond to the Never End or to the Flame of Outer World until the Flame of Outer World is gone off of the chase. And then the Never End ability would be put after the Flame of Outer World. So it should be that one. So that's that interaction. So a few things that you could like do with this that were like pretty prevalent is you could play a like you could play a Prisia to like search and then get like a Witch of the Fallen Kingdom at Seal 5, and then get so like you play your Flames, you get your Witch of the Fallen Kingdom at Seal 5, which triggers. So then Witch would search your Seal, like you would search like the Seal 4, Witch with like a pointy hat, and then you would negate something, and then it couldn't be stopped. Like, that negation couldn't be stopped because neither player could chase to Flame of Outer World. But nothing that was happening on top of the flame was player driven. It was all driven by the game, by just triggered automatic objects. Okay. Player A plays and resolves at the Paradise of the Fallen Angels while also controlling a permafrost. With the enter effect of the Paradise of Fallen Angels on the chase, player B responds by playing a Dispelling Stone. Targeting Paradise, the Dispelling Stone resolves, destroying Paradise, after which its effects resolve. What is the value for X? So X is determined in 2 different locations, depending on what X needs. So, in the event of something like Atomic Turbulence, that's a new one. Like, as an additional cost to play this card, you may discard any amount of atoms. And then X becomes the amount of discarded atoms. Or in the case of something like Permafrost, where you rest up to X target non-magic stones, etc., etc. X is determined when the card is before the card is put onto the chase, because it is information relevant in order to play the card. So, like, targets have to be chosen before a card is played. X values for like certain information have to be determined when a card is played. Like cost, stuff like that. All that determines like an X value. However, in the case of Paradise of the Fallen Angels, it doesn't need any of that. It only checks on resolution, how many demonic worlds you have, and then just puts into play the, I think, Fallen Angels, right? Fallen Angels and or demons. So it checks on resolution, not on play. So there are 2 different times where X is checked. So for this one, the answer is 1. However, caveat to that, if we had reworded this question and had swapped Permafrost and Paradise of Fallen Angels, so it was player A plays and resolves a Permafrost, and then, well, it'd have to be worded a little bit differently, but if we effectively swapped Permafrost and Paradise of Fallen Angels, the answer would actually be 2. Even if you Dispelling Stone the Paradise of Fallen Angels or the Permafrost in response to the effect, the X is already set. It doesn't re-update. So that is good to know. But yeah, the answer to this one would be 1. Layers. And if you want the CR part for that, this one doesn't really have a CR part. This is just kind of game knowledge, and I do apologize for that, because there's not really like a players cannot chase section. Again, it's just triggered automatic objects and stuff like that. But that's just more on game knowledge. The CR section for this would be in 903. So this is the second part where X is resolved, or where X is determined in 903.3b1. It's if a method to determine X hasn't been determined yet, you determine it then while the card's resolving. The other part is in 903. I think G. Yeah. If a method to determine the value of X, well, it's all of 903.2G. So if it represents an uncertain value represented by X or Y, you determine its value. Mainly if it's used to determine cost, number of targets, or information of targets, etc. Determine the value of X at this time. Okay. So those are the 2 parts for that. Layers. This would be under continuous effects, which is 907. No, 909. 909. So layers are right here. So this is asking that player A has a Lilius Petal in the field with 9+1/+1 counters on it. Player B has an Alice's World of Madness in the field. Player B plays and resolves a Charlotte's Light Transformation Magic targeting the Lilius Petal. Player A plays and resolves an Arm Suit. What is the stat line of the Lilius? So it's a 13/13, right? Because it's a 4/4. It has 9+1/+1 counters. It gains -2/-2 from the Alice's World of Madness. So it would become a 11/11. And then it becomes a 6/6 until end of turn. So the effects are applied in so how continuous effects are applied is basically if an effect is dependent on another effect to apply. I'm trying to think of a case where something would be like dependent. Like, let's say there was a thing that said, like, all J resonators gain -5, and, like, you had a magic stone that was a J resonator, and it was, like, a 10/10 or something like that, then the effect of it being a resonator is dependent on, or it getting the -5 is dependent on the magic stone being a resonator. That's like a bad example, but that's like the dependency thing. Otherwise, if you don't have a dependency order, it's just the effect applied earlier applies first, and things don't reapply or re-update. So everything that changes value information is going to apply and then effectively snapshot. So except for +1/+1 counters. So what'll happen is it gets the -2/-2, then it becomes a 6/6. So the -2/-2 has already applied, and then it also becomes a 6/6. So it snapshots into a 6/6, and then the -2/-2 doesn't reapply. It's already been applied to the resonator. Okay, so it would be, at that point, it would be a 6/6, and then it would also have the 9 +1/+1 counters, so it'd be a 15/15, and then Armed Suit comes into play, at which point it would become a 19/19, because it gains +4/+4. So again, they all apply on the same thing. They just apply one on top of the other, and just keep snapshotting and don't reapply. The only thing to this is apply all continuous effects of counters that change value information occur on a different layer than non-counter information, and they occur on a layer beneath it. So all non-counter information gets applied, and then counter information gets applied. So it would still gain the full +9/+9 from the counters. So the answer should be 19/19. Okay, so that's how that works. I guess I already had revenge ticked for some reason. Which of the following is true about revenge? So revenge. Revenge is a continuous ability held by cards. Revenge text means if an entity you control is put into a graveyard from the field this turn, this card gains text. I did not write this question, but James wrote this, and he was being a little sneaky with this one. So it requires an entity to be put into the grave from the field. It will not be active if a player has discarded a resonator. That is not an entity going from field to grave. If a resonator token has been sent to that player's graveyard from that field that turn, this comes up in a question later, I believe. Tokens move to whatever zone they're destined to go to. So, like, for example, if you had something that said bounce token to a hand, put it to the grave, put it to the top of the deck, etc., etc., they go to that zone, and then they cease to exist. They don't immediately cease to exist upon resolving an effect that would cause them to leave the field. So they would go to the grave. They are considered an entity while in play, and they would go to the grave and then cease to exist, so it would trigger something like revenge. The reason why he was being a little sneaky, this one, revenge abilities are only active if an entity that player controlled was destroyed that turn. He also, like, capitalizes only, which is why I think he's sneaky. It's not based on destruction. It's based on the card being put into a graveyard from the field. It does not have to be destroyed in order for revenge to trigger. And then none of the above doesn't apply because B applies. So it would be B for the revenge answer. Okay. Player A controls Charlotte with no guidance counters. Player A plays and resolves Hero, putting 2 guidance counters on it. So guidance, guidance, oh my god. I need guidance with how to spell it. So the guidance sequence, I believe it's here. I believe it's this example text. So this CR 11.47.3 covers this, but if you want, like, a better example for how it works, so this is explaining if 2 guidance counters are put onto a card that has the effect text that you see above. Since the card already had 1 guidance counter of it, it's explaining that only the guidance 2 and only guidance 3 effects are applied, However, the final sentence, the automatic ability is now played with the effect text, draw a card, put a hero from your hand into play. So if you go up multiple guidance counter steps on a card simultaneously through an effect like Hero of the Sacred Spirit, it triggers both guidance effects onto a same automatic ability. It doesn't go one automatic ability of produce white, one of draw 2 cards. It just goes produce white, draw 2. That's the full effect. So in this case, it would be one automatic ability is put on the chase with the text produce white, draw 2 cards. Okay. So it's just this last sentence of the example right here. Tells you exactly what you need to know. Okay. So this question's kind of funny. We had multiple people edit this and proofread this, in addition to myself and James, and we still got the wrong value information. So the best way to answer this question, which most people did, very few people got this one incorrect. So thank you for that. Is just to pretend this says 1900, not 1800. But so this question is: player A plays and resolves Ultra Magic Stone Golem, which has the enter effect destroy all J resonators your opponent controls with attack less than the attack of this card, while the opponent controls a Forest of Darkness, giving it -100, -100. And then the opponent playing the Forest of Darkness also kills the Ultra Magic Stone Golem in response. So it's and then the enter effect resolves. So it's just asking what happens because the game is trying to take from the attack of Ultra Magic Stone Golem after it has already left the field. So this is a case of LKI, or last known information. Last known information. Which is it's just one section, and it's if for any reason any information of a card in a zone should be referred to, but the card has moved to another zone, information of the card in the former zone is referred to. So this was in the field, moves to the grave, and it needs to refer to the attack value, which is technically only present. Well, not only, but it's really only present in the field. So it'll refer to it in the field. So it will destroy all J resonators your opponent controls with an attack of 1900 or less. It does say less than the attack of this card. So it wouldn't be 1900 or less. It would be 1800 or less, but not less than 1800. So it should be less than 1900 or 1800 or less. But we goofed. So it'll be B. The answer to this one is B. But yeah, it's just an LKI question. So if you're looking for that, it's right there for you. Player A attacks player B with Star Dragon. Player B blocks with an atomic fairy with 200 damage already on it. Which of the following is true? I guess I already clicked that one too. So this one is Pierce. Pierce is a continuous ability, changes how damage is dealt. The controller of the attacking J resonator with Pierce first assigns damage in multiples of 100 to the blocking J resonator equal to or more than that blocking J resonator's capacity. And then 11.2 or 1102.2a is defense of a J resonator minus damage on it is called the capacity. So you assign damage to it equal to or greater than the capacity, which in this case would be 100 because it already has 200 damage on it. And then the remaining damage goes to in this case it would be the opponent, but for Pierce it's the original attack target. So because this has precision, if you attack an untapped resonator and then someone chooses to block it, the Pierce damage would go through to the resonator instead of the opponent if you had chosen to attack that. But they attack the opponent. So player A would assign 100 or more damage to the fairy, and the remaining damage goes to the opponent. Okay. Player A plays the Mysteries of Zero without Seal 10 and targets Princess Kaguya, which of the following is true? Destroy target Magic Stone entity with total cost 3 or less. So this kind of goes back to the very first question with Mirage. In the field, the alternative cards only track the half that is in play. In this case, the Resonator half. So it would only be a total cost of 2. It doesn't consider the bottom part of Flying Bamboo. So it is a legal target for the Mysteries of Zero. So they are allowed to target it, and then they would kill it. And then they get a knowledge counter. Yep, so it'd be D. And that's just another alternative one. It's exactly the same as question 1. It's just kind of instead of applying it to the hand, where it's considered both halves, it's applying it to the field, where it's considered only the one half. Okay. Player A is playing the Chant half of Lumia with Awakening. Which of the following is true about Lycan? So Awakening is an additional cost. So Awakening means as you play this card, you may awaken it. If you do, it has an extra cost of cost and is played to the field with that. So extra cost does not add to total cost or to the actual cost of the card itself. Cost is only covered by the actual printed cost associated with the card. So in the case of Lycan, if you play the Wings of Light and Darkness, you can, and it would be free. You wouldn't have to pay the Darkness Will in order to play it. However, you would still have to pay the 1 Light Will in order to awaken it. So you are allowed to awaken it. That is an option. However, you would have to pay the White Will, or Light Will, I forget what they call it, in order to actually get the awakening effect. So this one would be, you may play it awakened, but you must pay. Yep. So it would be B. Which of the following is true about Barrier? So Barrier. Barrier is a continuous ability. This card cannot be targeted by spells or abilities controlled by a player other than the controller of this card. So players may target their own entities. That is true. Neither player can target an entity. That is untrue. God's Arts may target. That is also untrue. So it would be A. Player A controls a beast token put into the field by burning Rabbit Dash. Player B controls Gravekeeper at the Academy. Which of the following is true about the beasts when this card is put into the graveyard from the field ability? So Gravekeeper's cards in all graves lose all abilities. Burning Rabbit Dash has, when this card is put into a grave from the field, deals 200 damage to target J Resonator. So this is a zone, not zone movement restriction. I think this is in basic, actually. Basic. Maybe it is in zone movement restriction? No. No, it should be in basic? Unless it's in automatic abilities. Hold up. See the information, except each player, if a card moves, if it moves, it keeps the same orientation. Maybe it's in automatic abilities. Automatic. Aha! It was in automatic abilities. There we go, we found it. So 906.7. So some automatic objects will trigger when a card moves from one zone to another. In this case, it's the rabbits moving from the field to the grave. If they refer to the moved card, so it's 906.7a. So if a card would move from a public zone to a hidden zone, or no, it's not this one. So if a card moves from a public zone to a hidden zone, or a hidden zone to a public zone, it refers to the card in the public zone instead of the hidden zone. That's for something else. If the card moved from a ruler area or field to an area that is not or ruler area in the field, or vice versa, it refers to the card when it's in the field or ruler area. Otherwise, it'll refer to the card in the destination zone. So, for this one, it refers to 906.7b, sorry. So when a card moves from the field to another zone, and triggers because of it, it'll refer to the card within the field. So even if it moves from the grave, or from the field to the grave, or from the field to the removed area, it'll refer to the card in the field. So because of that, the Gravekeeper, which is cards in all graves lose all abilities, would not apply, because the effect is not triggering in the grave, it's actually triggering on the field, which is kind of a weird little like common misconception thing that happens. So this is what would happen for that. Okay. So the ability will trigger. Okay. Player A controls a world ender. Which of the following is true? This is a mythic question. I was actually kind of out of the game at the time the Regalia all came back with the mythic tag. So mythic is an automatic ability. It means if you control 2 or more entities with mythic that share a name, you trigger a effect where you banish all but one of them. I didn't know that. I thought it was literally just legendary from Magic. So I gave a few incorrect rulings when I first came back. But so if you play a second World Ender, you're allowed to respond by tapping the first one or anything like the new one or whatever you want, because mythic is a trigger. So you can play another World Ender. You can also do the second thing. After a second has entered the field, player may not play a rest. Oh yeah. No, it's not destroyed by rules process. It's destroyed by an automatic trigger, so it should be B, since that one is true. Okay, so that's mythic. Okay. Which of the following is true about Sparklefish's enter ability? This is the most wrongly answered question on this quiz. It's this one is a close second, but this one is the most incorrectly answered question, which is kind of funny to me, because I thought it was pretty easy personally. But so how this works is this is all in playing a card, which is all in 903. 903. Okay, so in 903, to play a card, you have to go through this whole process. So we're just gonna briefly go through this, and I'll stop when it matters. So at this point, the card is moved to the chase. Okay, the card is not resolved yet. The card is being moved to the chase. It's not even a legal target on the chase yet. It is just moved to the chase. Right after that, if a card or ability has the text choose number, the player chooses that number of options in the text, options not chosen, blah, 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 blah. Enter, choose one at random. So you have now chosen one at random. This is not happening at resolution. Okay, so the choice of mode cannot happen on resolution. It has to happen while the card is being played. So A is already incorrect. Moving on. Choice of targets happens on resolution. So choice of mode always happens before choice of targets. The reason for that is if choice of mode didn't happen before choice of targets, then in the case of Sparklefish, every time you played Sparklefish, in order for its enter effect to legally go on the chase, you would have to have both a resonator and a non-resonator spell on the chase simultaneously in order for its enter effect to legally go onto the chase, if choice of mode did not happen before targets were selected. So keep that in mind. Next, targets. Choice of targets happens on resolution. That is also incorrect. It happens at 903.2h, this is still not resolution. Resolution is all the way down here at 903.3. We still got like a page to go before our cards are resolved. So if the card needs targets, you choose legal ones. So choice of targets does not happen on resolution. So A and B are not correct. And then we have a target for each mode is chosen when the ability goes on the chase. And I already talked about why that is also not true. Because in order for this to be true, this would have to be true. Or something like that. But anyway, And yeah, so I just talked about this one. So targets happen after mode is chosen, as you can see here. So none of these things are true. So this is none of the above. Okay. And maybe it was worded weirdly or something, but yeah, this was the most incorrectly answered question, which I honestly thought it was going to be this one, because replacement effects are scary. Replacement effects. Replacement effect. Okay, so this question is player A controls a white wizard with 2+1/+1 counters on it, and white wizard has the effect to prevent all damage that would be dealt to resonators with a +1/+1 counter on them by chance and abilities. And then the same player who controls the white wizard also plays Desperate Aid, which is until end of turn, the next damage that would be dealt to target resonator you control is dealt to you instead. And then the opponent plays a Thunder and targets the white wizard. So the question is, what happens with the replacement effects? So it's all in 9.10.2a. So if there are more than one replacement effects for dealing damage, and at least one of them doesn't contain a prevention effect, the controller of the effect dealing the damage chooses one of them that contains no damage prevention effect and applies it. It's just this sentence. This whole sentence is how you answer this question. So there's one damage prevention effect, and then there is another replacement effect that is not a damage prevention effect. It is just a redirect, effectively, is the best way to phrase that. So the player controlling the damage chooses the one, that contains no damage prevention, which in this case is only Desperate Aid. So they have to deal the damage to the opponent, is how it would resolve. So the Thunder will deal 500 damage to the opponent. There is no choice. Like I as the player cannot choose for the damage to be prevented. I as the person with the two preventions cannot pick one or the other. It's just the it will go to my opponent. Okay, so the damage is dealt to player A. All right, so that's the answer for that one. Which of the following is true about Melfi Traveling Sorceress? Her ability does not go on the chase. This one, I'm not going to pull it up in the CR. This is basically referring to just the fact that her ability contains will production in it. Will production in itself is inherently not a will ability. Will abilities are, they have an actual definition. I don't want to describe it incorrectly, but they don't use the chase. They're basically like they're like activated abilities that do nothing but produce will are considered will abilities, or automatic triggers that do nothing but produce will. I think that do nothing but produce will off of will being produced are also will abilities. So I think those are the only two cases. I could be wrong, but those do not use the chase. However, any other effect, like an enter effect that says produce to will, like even if Melfi's didn't have the draw a card part on her text, it's still not a will ability. So it would still use the chase. So her enter ability does use the chase. She can be canceled by number 7 anti-magic. So while you play this card, occurs in all of 903.2. So it occurs in all of this section right here. However, while you play, stops applying as soon as you hit 903.3, which as soon as you hit 903.3 is when the card becomes like chaseable. So like your opponent can respond to it, or you can respond to it, or anything like that. So as soon as Melfi is on the chase, like ready to resolve, she's no longer a chant. She's only considered a resonator. And number 7 only cancels chant spells. So she's not a legal target for the cancel part for number 7. And then her enter ability can produce Moon Will is also untrue. Moon and Time Will are specific. I'm not going to look for it. I'll just explain it. Moon and Time Will are not attributes; they're characteristics of will. Is how they're explained in the CR. So when it says produce 2 wills in any combination of attributes, again, Moon and Time are a characteristic. They're not an attribute. So Moon Will is a characteristic. Time Will is a characteristic. Light, darkness, wind, fire, water are all attributes. So because she says she produces attributes, she cannot produce Moon or Time Will. If there was ever a card that came out that said produce 2 wills in any combination of characteristics, I guess, then they could, but then they couldn't produce any of the other colors. So that would be how that works. So the answer for this one is none of the above. Okay. Player A plays Fish Drive with the first mode randomly selected, while Player B controls Exorcist Mage. Which of the following is true? So Exorcist Mage is if a Resonator would be put into the field without being played from a hand, remove it from the game instead. And this just puts a Resonator into the field via the effect. So even though you are playing the Fish Drive from the hand, you are not playing the card from your hand. You're not playing the card. You're not playing a Resonator from your hand. A Resonator is entering the field off of an effect, but it is not a Resonator being played from your hand. So in this case, the token, as you can see, I have already marked it. I guess I went through this already, sort of, and marked them. The fish token's removed. So it's removed from the game, but again, all tokens move to a location off the field before ceasing to exist. So it's not that the token never enters play. It does enter play, but it would immediately be removed from the game. Well, it actually doesn't enter play, but it immediately gets removed from the game, and then it ceases to exist. Okay, so that's how that would work. It's not never put anywhere, and a 6/6 token is not put into the field. It's put into the removed area and ceases to exist, because it's a replacement effect for where it would go. Player A plays an Awakened Haster and chooses to copy a spell. Which of the following is true? The copied spell may be awakened by paying the awakening cost. So when you copy something, it copies all information, including any X values determined on play. It copies any modes chosen. It copies any awakening value or any awakening like text that has been applied, etc., etc. However, it does not give you the option to awaken the card. It just puts a carbon copy of what the spell was on the chase onto the chase again as a copy. So you can't awaken it. You can't choose to awaken it. You can't choose to have new modes chosen. And then you may copy the half of an alternative card that was not played. No, that is also incorrect. Because alternative cards, again, this kind of goes back to the other alternative card questions. When an alternative card is on the chase, it is only the half that is on the chase. It is not both halves. It is only the one half. So this one would be none of the above. Okay. Which of the following is true about Windstone Shot? If this card was awakened, choose up to 2 instead. You may banish a Magic Stone, deal 1,000, or put a Magic Stone from your grave into the field rested. Rest area covered J ruler you control. Alright, so for choices. So for choose effects, you're not allowed to choose the same option multiple times. Unless a card specifically says you may choose the same option more than once. I think there's like a Priscia card that allows you to do that. So you can't choose up to you can't choose like banish a Magic Stone twice if it says choose up to 2. You have to pick both effects. The controller may choose the order that the effects resolve. That is also incorrect. Effects cards resolve top down. So it would always resolve with the banish a Magic Stone, deal 1,000 first, and then put a Magic Stone into the grave. The controller may play a Magic Stone's will ability during resolution before they banish it. That is also incorrect. You're not allowed to will abilities. You can't play at any time, really. You can play them in the process of playing a card. The CR specifies it. Like it actually has in the like will abilities and produced wills section, which is in the 900s, I believe. It specifies and goes into when you're allowed to play a will ability, but you're not allowed to play a will ability during the resolution of a card. Okay, so it would have to be like as the card is being played, or beforehand, or anything like that. Okay, so none of the above would be true for Winston Shot. Did he do 3 none of the aboves in a row? Oh no, they're almost back to back. What an animal. Player A plays and resolves Magic Stone Research Institute while controlling 4 differently named Magic Stones, so it's a +8/+8 to the board. Player B then plays Hades, which of the following is true. Hades is if an effect would increase attack or defense, it decreases that much instead. So this isn't a layers question. It may look disguised as a layers question. The biggest thing about... we're actually going to go back to replacement effects. Oh, it doesn't actually say it here. So if an effect ever has instead on it, that's a replacement effect. It follows like no other logic. It's not a continuous effect. It's not a random automatic ability or anything like that. It's a replacement effect. If it says instead, it's a replacement effect. So this is just a continuous effect being affected by a replacement effect. And it's just saying things that may not... So stuff that was already in the field will continue to gain. That's incorrect. You don't get to choose whether the effect is replied. So yeah, everything will just gain -8/-8. It just makes the whole board get swapped to being negged instead of gaining an increase. So that's how that stuff works. Player A has a Belial. Is this the last question? Hell yeah. Player A has a Belial in their rule area that has successfully resolved its God's Art this turn, which means it has its fallen effect of you cannot lose the game, prevent all damage. Player B plays and resolves the Transformed, and its enter ability goes on the chase. What best explains what happens when the Transformed resolves. So, your opponent discards a card, your opponent loses 400 life. So, mandatory effects, you resolve as much of them as possible. So in the case of something like the Transformed, where it says, so I'll go with the answer first to try and explain the thought behind all this. So it will do both. So your opponent will discard a card, and they will also lose 400 life, even through Belial's Fallen stuff. So effects will fully trigger if they're mandatory. They'll trigger as much as possible if they're mandatory. If something is optional and you can't fulfill part of the optional requirement, so if something says you may, like I think Attendant of Asmodeus is like you may remove the top 5 cards of your deck, like recover 3 stones. If you don't have 5 cards in your deck, you aren't allowed to remove like up to like 3 of them, like the only 3 that are in your deck, and recover 3 stones. You have to fulfill the may requirement, the optional requirement, in order to fulfill the mandatory requirement. In this case, everything's mandatory, so everything will resolve as much as possible. So your opponent will always discard the card. That's not related to anything. It's kind of where I was going with the mandatory optional thing. And then your opponent loses 400 life. This is the big one. Loss of life is not damage. Loss of life is just considered... I actually wonder if it's in the CR. Oh god. Loss of life. Oh god. Lose life? No. Lose the game? I'd have to comb through this, and it would take too long. I don't actually know the section where it would be, but loss of life is not damage. So any effect that ever states your opponent loses life, so like the Transformed, like I think Shadow X, other stuff like that, effects that say your opponent lose life get through damage prevention effects. So yeah, so that is how that stuff works. So in the event of the Transformed, or like Shadow X or anything like that, even though Belial has their Fallen, they may not lose the game. Like if they got reduced to 0 life or less because of it, they wouldn't lose the game until their Fallen effect is no longer active. However, the damage would still like go through, or not damage, the loss of life would still go through. Okay, so it would be they will discard a card and lose 400 life. All right, so that's the whole test. That is 100%. Again, I know all the answers, so I wrote some of this. So you can kind of go through mine, see if you can remember which ones you answered and stuff like that. I believe we'll be releasing the answer sheet and all that good stuff. I'm gonna schedule this to go up on at midnight on Sunday, when James takes down the test. So we'll well, I forget what time zone he put it for, but it'll go up when James puts down the test, immediately after, the minute after. And then this will just be on YouTube for all y'all to peruse at your leisure. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I look forward to seeing all of you at the GP, if I haven't already, considering this is going to come out in the middle of it. And yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.